Hello, it says we're live. You are live. Excellent. I feel live. It's a wonderful sunny day here in England. We have a trade deal with the United States. Apparently, that means we're all going to be much happier. And I'm going to be talking about debt, which is very important, both economically. We've just had a cut in interest rates here and lots of other things. And we're going to talk about why you need more debt in your tech team. So I'm Squirrel. Welcome to the Squirrel Squadron. If you're here to talk about debt, you found the right place. So I'm going to tell you exactly why tech debt is not a bad word. It's something your engineers should feel happy about, and you should feel happy about. And so stop complaining about it. That's my message for today. Right. Now, folks will be joining us for the next few minutes. I want to give just a very brief introduction to the squadron. Laura has some nice text to scroll across the screen, which she's going to do. She's our community manager. She makes sure everything happens. Nothing would get done without Laura. But I just want you to know what the squadron is. It's a community of tech and non-tech folks coming together. And we're closing in on 3,000. We're very close to a few thousand folks around the world. We got 6 continents represented. No penguins yet, but we're working on it. And all those folks are working together to answer questions. I just got a wonderful one today about embedding engineers in customer service teams. Not our topic, but one that we're discussing on the forum, and you'll see discussion there. That's our community that's up 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Folks interacting, discussing, asking questions. I appear frequently, write lots of stuff there. And Laura's got some examples of the kinds of topics we're looking at on the forum as we speak. There's also these weekly events, and we have lots of provocative ones coming. I'm live in London if you happen to be there next Thursday the 13th, pressing the flesh, saying hello, working with a consultancy called ThoughtBot to meet lots of interesting folks. So please come along to that and discuss how those two groups can interact. How can tech and non-tech people actually be friends? So that's happening next Tuesday the 13th. And then we have a couple more coming in the next few weeks in May, and we have a whole bunch that we got, lined up for June. We haven't announced yet. But for example, we have one coming on why you should fire your product managers. So now I love product managers. I think they're wonderful. But I still think that you don't need the title product managers. So that's going to be another live stream just like this one. And Ryan has a question. I'm going to come to your question in a second. Ryan, thanks for joining. What was the other one that we're doing? Oh, we're doing software testing. So why your developers writing tests is actually tremendously valuable to people who are not technical in your business. Lots of people miss this. They think, oh, I need some tests to make sure my software doesn't fail. They're right, but there are lots of other benefits and values that come from having software testing, and they're benefits directly to business people. And in the age of AI, that's even more important and more valuable. So lots of events coming up. These are all free. This is my way of giving back. Nothing ever costs anything in the Squirrel Squadron. And I love talking to you guys. So we got some fantastic questions ahead of time, and I'll try to cover those. And I'll run through topics that I have down here. But I'd love for you guys to ask me lots of questions, argue with me, be provocative. That's my job, but I'm also hoping that you'll have some disagreement. You might tell me tech debt is horrible. I have to swim in it. It's horrible. It's awful to write this code. And we'll talk more about that. I'd love to hear disagreement from you. It's super, unfortunately, because this is one way, I can't have you talking on the screen. I love doing that, but we can't do that here. But I do see all of your chat messages. So wherever you're watching me, please put something in the chat. Let's try that now. So just like Ryan, would you say hi? Excuse me. Would you say hi and where you're coming from? And what city, what country, where in the world are you? Are you a penguin? That would be really interesting. And also, what questions do you have? What's the urgency? What brought you here? How bad is tech debt for you? How great is it for you? What are your thoughts? Now, Ryan asks the question. He makes a very good point. The forum is indeed for executives only, and that's because we want to have a kind of safe space for folks who are operating at that level. And that is how it works. So Ryan, good point. Thank you. I do encourage lots of discussion about these topics in lots of other places. So on these live streams, for example, Ryan, you're an old participant. You've been here a lot in a lot of my events, and I really appreciate that. and I'd welcome you, dropping me a line and prompting a discussion. I write my weekly emails. I didn't even mention that. I write those pretty much every week. I don't hit it every time, but I do pretty well on giving you some provocative and incisive thoughts. And I love it when people discuss and argue with me there. I post them on LinkedIn, so that's a great place to argue and discuss. We had a super one just a few weeks ago on the Signal affair, where some Americans in the government decided that having a chat on Signal was a great idea until they discovered they'd accidentally invited a journalist. And there was some very interesting discussion when that went up on LinkedIn about whether policies work or whether prevention works and so on. So lots of discussion opportunities, Ryan, but you're right. Good thing I should mention that the forum is for executives. Okay, but I just want to underline, people who are not executives are totally welcome, and we want you in the squadron, and love having events and opportunities for you as well. And that reminds me, I'm going to ask Laura, who's watching and making sure all this works. Laura, can you help me remember, we're overdue for a non-executive only event. So we sometimes have executive only events. We also, less frequently, but still regularly, we have one just for folks who aren't executives in the squadron. And sometimes I get some really provocative, pointed questions there about why people in the C-suite, all those suits are doing everything wrong. Very provocative and interesting. Ryan, thanks for prompting that. Laura will help me remember to put one in for, I hope, in June or July. Great. So let's talk about tech debt, which is why we came here. By the way, there's a recording of this. You can send it to your friends, your boss, your developers, all those folks. There are some folks who couldn't come here. So hello, if you're watching this on a recording in the future. You might not be sure what the Signal chat reference is anymore, but if this is 2026. But I hope this is valuable to people at any time. This is an evergreen topic. Everyone is always talking about tech debt. Let's get the definition down first. So if you go look into the history of this idea of tech debt, it actually is very interesting. It comes from something called the C2 Wiki. Now, we all know Wikipedia, and a lot of people think that's what a wiki is. It actually isn't. There's an idea called a wiki, which predates Wikipedia. And of course, as you know, anybody can go and edit Wikipedia. People rapidly correct it. If I change, the president is Douglas Squirrel instead of the president is Donald Trump, that somebody will notice that and change it quickly. But in the very early days, the idea of a wiki was simply a web page that anyone could edit. And they weren't necessarily corrected that quickly. And the very first wiki was this thing called the C2 Wiki. I forget what it was. CC stood for something. I don't remember what. And a guy called Ward Cunningham set it up. It was his idea to have this notion that was new at the time, that anyone could edit a web page. Previous to that, web pages were static pieces of data that you could read on the screen, but it was like a book. You couldn't go change it so that everybody who read the book would see what you changed. And on that wiki, you can go find this if you want to. If anybody's interested, ask me or here on the forum, and I'll go find the link for you. He talks about the analogy with debt in a business or debt in a person's financial position. And he said, debt is really useful. Debt is a good thing. So when you read this initial description, he talks about it as being a two-edged sword, which it is for finance. Of course, if you get in too much debt, you go bankrupt, right? You can't service the debt. You can't make the payments. That really doesn't work very well, and you can really bankrupt yourself. So that's a way that debt is negative if you can't pay it. But it's tremendously positive if you can pay it. And he said, what we want to do in technology is think about ourselves as sometimes taking out a loan and saying, we're going to make this technology in a particular way that involves debt, that makes it require paying off. And then we're going to make regular payments on that debt until we pay it down. And we're going to make that choice intentionally. That's what tech debt is actually about. That's what Ward meant when he invented the term. The problem is it's become one of these words, it's just kind of generally pejorative. It's just generally a bad word. And you use it for anything that you don't like. I had a wonderful manager in my days when I was an employed CTO. And Satch, who was one of the best salespeople I've ever met, came along and he said, Squirrel, you're one in the long line of people working here in technology, and every one of them, every engineer I've ever met wants to rewrite everything. And that's really wise words. That's really sharp observation, because often what tech debt means to a person who is using it in this kind of generic negative way is code that I don't like. Even more, code that I didn't write, and therefore it's hard for me to understand. And we actually have a perfectly good term for that. That's called a legacy code. And that's code that, for instance, doesn't have tests or is hard to use. The logic isn't there. When you actually sit down to read it and try to change it, you get confused. When you change something in one place, it makes breaks something in another place. Now, I have some great stories about all of these that will illustrate some of this if this is not familiar. But what I really want to encourage folks to do first is use the terms correctly. So tech debt is something that you incur intentionally. You say, I am going to create some debt here, just like I might borrow money from the bank and say, well, here's a deed to my house. Give me some money. I'm going to pay it back gradually, and then you'll give me the deed back. And if ever I don't pay it back, you'll get my house. But assuming I do pay it back, you'll get more money. You'll get the interest, but I will get to have the cash now so that I can fix my house or go on vacation or whatever it is that I want to do that's valuable. In a business, that leverage is tremendously important to have, and we'll talk more about that. That's tech debt. Legacy code might come from any source. Might be, some crazy person sat down, banged out some code, didn't really understand what they were doing, and made a big mess, and we have to go fix it. That's not tech debt. It might be that you actually need to pay that down and change it, but it's not something that you incurred. It's not something that you consciously decided, I'm going to have this debt here, I'm going to have a repayment plan, and so on. That's what tech debt should be. Legacy code is a more broad term referring to stuff that you want to rewrite. So I hope that terminology is helpful. I'm going to be talking about why tech debt is wonderful. Legacy code is also wonderful. And maybe I'll do another session on that. And if you have questions about it, please ask me. So no matter how you got bad code, it's sometimes bad, meaning hard to use, hard to maintain. That can be tremendously useful. People have made huge profits on legacy code. We're going to talk specifically about the case where you have some debt. You understand what it is. You know where the interest payments should be going. And do you choose to make the payments? Do you choose to take on more debt? How does that benefit you? What value does it have, and so on? That's what we're going to talk about. We have a few comments. We have Ryan says CC stands for carbon copy. I had no idea. I guess it's kind of like you're copying the text and you're sharing it with the world or something. I didn't know that. So thank you very much. I remember there was a project called CCC, and that gave rise to the extreme programming methodology. And I always thought they were linked somehow. But thank you, Ryan. I had no idea that was the source of the original wiki before Wikipedia. Say says intentional tech debt. Exactly. That's the sort of thing that really Ward meant in the original coinage of the term. Reese says, I'm not quite sure what Reese is linking to, but a business needed to go fast for market fit. Exactly. So you take on some tech debt just like you might borrow money on your building. You might own an office building or something like that, and you might borrow money on that to generate cash, which you can invest into another part of the business. You make more money, you pay off the debt, and that's a very valuable thing. Okay, let me get to some stories now. It's been too long. We've been going for 15 minutes, and I haven't even told a story yet, so I better do that. I'm going to tell you two stories about a company I worked at, which you can rapidly figure out, but I will give them a fig leaf because they might be embarrassed by some of these bits, but it was many years ago. It's an e-commerce company. We sold very high value items that were remaindered or were not in fashion or not in season. And so we would have half price items that were very valuable. People really wanted them. So it was very popular. We ran TV ads and people would come to our site and we'd have big spikes and knock out servers because it was so popular and people were demanding these cheap items. And we had the world's ugliest, most horrible, terrible code you have ever seen. It had been written by one guy. He had never written a major system before, and he kind of figured it out on the fly. He was brilliant. I can't tell you enough how absolutely brilliant this guy was for having been completely untrained. In art, I should write about this sometime. In art, there's this notion of an outsider art. These are people who haven't been to art school, and they don't generally exhibit in galleries and so on. Banksy is kind of like this, although his stuff always winds up in galleries somehow. He's so famous. But these are less famous people who might, fill their house with murals and nobody sees it until they're, they've done a whole lot of beautiful art. And this guy had done the same thing with code. It was not built in any way that anyone else understood. It made sense to him, and he kind of just done it his way. But it worked. Somehow, people could actually buy this half-price stuff using his code. We went to see him one day, and I can't do a Bulgarian accent. He happened to be Bulgarian. And this is funnier in a Bulgarian accent, but I can't do it. So just pretend. And he was also the first person I ever met who did vaping, who did the e-cigarettes. So now set the scene for him. Now going to do a terrible rendition of it. We went to him and we said, this code is spaghetti. You get into one part of it and it goes all the way through and goes to some other part. And I put something here and it changes something over there. We just can't understand this at all. It's a complete mess. It's very confusing spaghetti code. And he said, I agree. My code, it is spaghetti. But it is nutritious spaghetti. All of you have jobs because of my nutritious spaghetti. And we couldn't argue with him. So that was making us a lot of money. And something we did to work around that is that we made sure the engineers were sitting right next to the customer service people in a big open plan office. If you've ever been in an e-commerce company, you spare lots of expense in order to keep costs down. And we really ran on thin margins. So we just had one big office. Everybody sat near each other and we were near the customer service people. That meant that when spaghetti went wrong, and we change something over here and we break it over there, we heard from customer service. They were right there. They said, oh my God, the site's down. Oh no, everything's broken. It's terrible. And we had a big red button. Now, I wish we'd been smart enough to make an actual physical one. We had an electronic one. But what we could do with this button is hit the button. And what it did was it took us back to how the code was before we made whatever change it was that broke things. So we had a big undo button, essentially. And all we did is, rather than try to fix this horrible code that was totally unmaintainable, really hard to understand, huge amounts of inadvertent tech debt. So this is legacy code, really. We did not make payments on this. We didn't try to pay down this tech debt. Instead, what we did is we had this big button. And whenever we make a change, we would listen and we'd be ready. We'd all be sitting there. We didn't go off to lunch or something. And if there were screams and shouts from customer service, we'd hit the button. And it would immediately put things back the way they were, and then we'd go investigate the problem. Now, why on earth would we do this crazy thing? Why didn't we go and fix the problem? Because it was very expensive to fix the problem. The payments on this debt were very high, and we chose not to incur them. We just said, what we're going to do is make sure this site stays up and people can buy cheap stuff, and we will maintain the system as best we can with this big red button. Now, a funny thing happened that turned out to be very valuable. The customer service people were shouting one day. And they said, my God, loads of things on the website are £1. And we said, wow, must be some really cool deal. The marketing people, that was very clever to put things up on the website for £1. Well, they hadn't intended to. These were things that cost £1,000 or $2,000 or $3,000. And what had happened was that the software didn't manage to handle a comma. So if you wanted to say 1,000 to mean this item cost £1,000, well, the website would just truncate that and make it £1. Now, the entertaining thing about this is that this debt, this problem, this difficulty in our software turned out to be extremely valuable because the marketing people said, this is gold. We love this. We can be on the front page of every newspaper. And they were, because what they did is they went out and promoted and they said, we have a special deal where periodically you can get things for £1. And they told us to go build software that did this. So they could choose, this thing will be £1. Now, of course, they didn't do it across the whole site. But just by accident, we had created this bug, which they turned out to love, and which actually was very valuable for customers. So people would come to the website looking for the £1 deal. They would also buy some other stuff, and that made everybody, including the marketing folks, extremely happy. So that's a couple of stories in praise of incurring some debt. And in this case, we just chose to maintain some debt. We chose not to pay it down. We didn't pay the interest on this debt. We chose not to make the payments to reduce the capital, or reduce the outstanding balance. We also didn't make it any worse. We just managed that debt, and we said, okay, we're going to carry this debt. Our software will be this valuable without debt. With debt, it's this minus the debt, and it's still valuable. So that's a financial calculation that you could do. You could say, I'm willing to put up with this. I'm willing to have some frustrated developers. I'm willing to have a big red button. I'm willing to have some customers who have to come back and buy stuff. Our customers didn't care. They said, oh yeah, the site was down for a couple minutes. Must have been my Wi-Fi. And they'd hit the refresh button and keep trying to come back so they could buy the cheap stuff. That's because our customers are motivated. Your situation might be different, and your calculation might be different. If you're building a nuclear power plant, you probably do want to remove more of the debt, right? You probably don't want to have a meltdown. But in almost every circumstance, in almost every company that I visit, if I see that there's a concerted effort to remove every single speck of dirt, every single bit of imperfect code, that team's not in touch with their customers. They're not making a rational decision about how much debt they want to maintain on their books. And we're going to say more about that. Ryan is jumping in with more things. Build big red button for squirrel. Oh, I hope I didn't go down. I think I'm still working. I can see everything operating, but shout if we're not. Laura will help make sure that we stay technically up. But yes, if you'd like to have a big red button for squirrel, I won't object. That would be absolutely fine. Yes, to convert technical debt to money. That's a very good comment. And that's exactly the theme of today's live stream. Let me go into that just a little bit. This is perfect timing. Think about a CFO. And if you are not a CFO, I would encourage you to go ask your favorite neighborhood CFO, what do they think about the concept of debt? For instance, ask them what would they think of a company that had no debt at all. One thing they would definitely tell you is that company is crazy. That makes no sense. A balance sheet that has no debts on it, only assets, it indicates that a company is not leveraging effectively. It's not making the best use of its assets because those assets are just sitting there. They're being valuable, but you can't convert it into anything you can do something with, right? You can't suddenly go off and invest in a new project in a new country or a new market or develop a new product using the cash that's sitting in your asset. You want to convert the asset to cash. You do that by borrowing against it. The bank helps you with that. You make interest payments. You, we hope, invest the cash someplace else, make more than what is on the interest, and therefore you make more profit for your shareholders. That's the way to think about tech debt as well. Where are there places where you can incur some debt, get greater investment someplace else, and have more value? Let me illustrate some of the things that can go wrong and go right if you use debt in the normal circumstance incorrectly, and then I'll make the analogy to technology. So one thing that happens if your company has very little debt, not enough debt, is that you're illiquid. In other words, you have, my neighbors are in this situation. They have lots of land. I live in an area with lots of sheep. I live right next to the Channel Tunnel leading into France, about 500 meters that way. And my main neighbors are 700 sheep. And then there's some cows over there and so on. There's not very urban environment I live in. And my neighbors have bought lots of land. This is a great thing for them. Their land has really appreciated. We're not making any more of it. Land in Britain is very valuable. And so this has worked great for them on paper. The problem is it's very hard for them to actually get cash out of that land. So they are not necessarily running as well as they could. They would do better to take a mortgage on some of that land, to take some borrowing out of it, and then they would have cash that they could use. And they could use it to live on. They could use it to invest in training or something else that would be valuable to them. And this is a problem for businesses that choose to stay very illiquid. What's astonishing to me is that lots of technology businesses keep their technology highly illiquid. In other words, they polish and they prune and they work really hard to get really high quality code. Good, nice ambition to have. I don't object to the idea that you might make your code easier to maintain, might make software better. Can't argue with that. It's kind of a no-brainer to say, well, I'd like it to be better. But better for what is the question I have for you. And the provocative thought for you is, how could you make your software somewhat worse, not really terrible? Certainly don't do anything unethical. Don't do anything that's going to cause people to lose money or lose confidence in you. But my God, you really could have software that is less good, that you don't polish quite as much. It's a little harder to maintain. Sometimes you get bugs. Customers are a little unhappy with certain parts of it. We all use software like that all the time. Visit Facebook, visit Google. You will find sharp edges and things that don't quite work right. And those companies, when they allow those bits of tech debt to remain, are keeping their software liquid. Because what they're not doing is restraining it so much and constraining it and making it perfect and polishing it until it's wonderful that nobody ever can touch it again. And I've seen lots of code like that. There's an extreme version. This is more for the technologists in the audience, but if you want to sound smart, quote this one to your nearest developer. What you can do is build tests that constrain your software really well. They make sure your software is doing exactly what you want it to do. As a matter of fact, it constrains it so much you can't change it. And that's very dangerous. So if you're going to your engineers and saying, hey, wait a minute, I'd like you to do it this way. I'd like the software to support this type of data. I'd like it to give me this kind of answer. And the answer is no, we can't. Then you're really at a kind of extreme version of tech debt. You've incurred so much that you actually don't have a pool of cash which you can invest in something else. Your engineers are spending all their time keeping the software working exactly as it is today, and you can't do anything new. Now, please don't get in that situation, that pathological condition where you have no cash and lots of assets, because the problem is you can't grow your company. If you can't grow your company in this environment, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. Technology is advancing very quickly. Things are changing in the environment. You know, we just got a trade deal in the UK that's upending our relationship with the US and our economy. You got to be able to respond to that quickly. And if your software is being polished to perfection to do what it does today, you're not going to be able to solve the problems of tomorrow. Have a wonderful client who's looking for new engineers, new blood, because they have exactly this problem. They're trying to build the technology of tomorrow, and they have the engineers of yesterday. That doesn't work out very well. You need to invest in people. You need to invest in the tools. You have to invest in what's in the market that's going to advance you. And if you keep your software illiquid, you can't do that. So here's another example. You want to talk about the return on your equity. Now, people talk about return on investment, and often what they'll say is, oh, yes, well, I need more cash so I can hire more engineers and so they can write more code, and then I'll somehow get some return on that. And often the last step is missing a bit, because people just say, oh, well, if I just had more engineers, I could write better code. Better for what is always the question I ask them, and often there's not much of an answer. They just say, oh, well, I need more products, I need more features, I need more stuff. Actually, your software might sell better, and your engineers and your people in your organization might be happier if you had less code, if you had fewer features, but they were better maintained, they were better run. And that's where return on equity is very important. If you just think about how much am I going to put in, how am I going to spend more and more money on engineers who write more and more code and build more and more products, you're never going to be thinking about, how do I get a return on the asset that I have? How do I make that asset more valuable? How do I make sure that the software I have is something I can change and maintain and improve? Maybe even I can have non-technical people change and update it. We had an event on this a couple of weeks ago. I had folks who were, CEOs of multiple businesses, not writing code at all, never having touched a line of Python or JavaScript, and they were writing software. If your software is responsive to that, it's set up to handle that. If it's ready, if it's not so illiquid that it can't be modified in that way, even wrongly, so some engineers have to go and fix it, so you have some tech debt, then you're not getting the right return on your equity, right? You have an asset, you're milking it, you're getting value from it today, from customers and what they can do with it, but you're not getting a return on changing it, improving it, making it better. And so if you went to a CFO and said, look, our return on it, we have loads of assets. Our assets are really wonderful. Look at these valuable assets. The CFO would also say, what's the return on those assets? What are you making from them? And ideally, you want to make more than what interest rates are. We just had an interest rate cut here. And so that means that money is cheaper. And that means CFOs are right now sitting down and saying, all right, bankers, how can you lend us more money? How can we increase our debt so that we can invest that someplace that will make more than that interest rate that you've just decreased? That's the sort of thinking you want your engineers doing. How can I invest more? How can I take something out of this asset and invest it someplace else so that I can keep up, use these amazing AI tools and other good things that are happening in your market? Okay, last example. It was this low interest rates. Yeah, so when you have lower interest rates, how can you make use of that? And how can you improve your position so you get lower interest rates? One of the things you can do in your team, and this is something I'm just chatting to a major IT provider today, and they're going to have me work on a project to help their team be much, much faster. And one of the first things we're going to do is improve their environment so they can attract better interest rates on their tech debt. They have loads of tech debt. They've been around for 25 years or so, doing lots of stuff, building lots of software. Everything's built up, and some debt they have incurred intentionally, some maybe more by accident, but they have it. They have plans to pay it off. And what I want to do is lower the interest rate on that. How can you make the payments lower? And one of the ways you can do that is by having more tests. Now, I'm doing a whole event on this, as I mentioned at the top of this. But the short version is that if you have control over what's in your software, if you know what the software is supposed to do and whether it does it or not, you're going to have many fewer distractions for your engineers, because you'll know what every change affects. You say, well, this change over here affected that thing over there. It's not quite perfect. We wish that change was separated, so I can change just one thing and it doesn't affect that. But I know that if I release this, I will break login for everyone. That sounds bad. People should be able to log in to our software. Passwords should work. So I will not release this software because I now know that something I changed over here broke the passwords, and I can go and fix that. And if I do that, I become much faster and also more confident. And that means that making the payments on my tech debt, making the changes that improve the software and make it easier to change, make it easier to maintain, improve the ability to add new features, well, that costs me less. And that's a way to lower your interest rates. So you want to be looking for all of these opportunities. How can I make the software more liquid so I can make changes more easily? How can I measure my return on equity so the asset isn't just sitting there, I'm actually making changes? And how can I lower the payments? How can I get a better deal from my banker? Everybody's renegotiating their loans right now, I guarantee it, because suddenly you're paying lower interest rates. And we're looking for even lower ones now that we have a trade deal with the US. Okay, Niall, good old friend Niall says, sometimes you can borrow more than you pay back. Yes, that's certainly right. There are examples where the bank goes out of business, so you don't owe them anything anymore. And actually in software, that's even more important and valuable. Because in fact, and this is a trick CFOs play as well, you can borrow money on something quite speculative and then choose not to actually pay it back. Now, this is kind of probably illegal in the financial world. If I were to set up a company and say, well, I'm going to run this company. If it works, it's great. If not, then I'm just going to default on all the loans and close down the company. If I do that on purpose, I think I get in trouble. It's certainly ethically very, very dubious. But it works great in software because, as Niall points out, very, very helpful point, you can start building some software, something new, something innovative, something that you might want to try. You might vibe code it, right? You go off and you get an AI to do most of the work, and you don't care about whether it's really maintainable and scalable, and you just want to see if it works. And if it doesn't work, you're very happy because you then incurred some debt and you never have to pay it off. You can throw away the code. Now, the problem that so many people have is they overvalue their assets. They say, yeah, I've got this asset. I spent 2 months building this thing. It must be valuable. Therefore, I have to maintain it and polish it and make it better. No, you don't. You can break something and decide, oh, man, that's just not quite right for me. It's good if you can invest less in that, if you can make yourself faster. We just talked about how to do that. And I can say more if people are interested. If you can make yourself faster, then you make a smaller investment. You get the same kind of learning. But once you have the learning, you do not have to maintain the asset. And if you don't maintain the asset, you don't maintain the debt. So that can be a tremendous way to really learn very quickly. And if you incur debt that way and then you get something that's valuable, you can use the cash flow to pay off the debt. If you don't, you throw it away and say, oh, well, this didn't work. I don't need to maintain it and I don't need to pay off the debt. Totally unethical in the financial world, highly valuable in the software world. Say says, yes, indeed, throw it away. Where you can, that's valuable to do. Of course, if you're doing that all the time, you might want to look at your selection process. Are you actually selecting things that are worth building? That's a different question. Now, let me describe sort of the worst case and best case with a couple of stories. Then I'm going to turn to questions. Please put more questions in the chat. I love what you're commenting on here, Say and Ryan and Reese and others. And also, we had some questions from folks who aren't able to be here, so I'm going to try to deal with some of those queries. But let me tell two stories about, well, I'll tell one first and then answer some questions. This is kind of the worst case story. I worked with a client, and actually there are several of these. I've just picked one as an example. And when I went to see the engineers, they were the happiest folks I'd ever seen. They told me about their beautiful processes, their clear specifications. They really understood what they were building. They had the world's most wonderful wall, the physical place to track their work. Some of you may never have seen this, you're young. And people used to have cards on physical walls when they worked in offices. You remember way back in the ancient days, before the pandemic, when people worked in offices. And they would put on the wall these cards that would track the different pieces of work they had. And these cards were beautifully lettered. They had something on the back that described the conversation they'd had with the customer, so they understood exactly what the software was for, so that they could build the right tests. The cards moved from category to category in a very smooth way. And they showed me all this as I was looking at them and evaluating them for an investor. And the thing that really struck me after I, kind of oohed and awed about the cards and said, boy, isn't this beautiful? You've got a wonderful process here. You're really tracking your work well. I said, there's no column that says done. There's no column that says customer using it, customer's happy, anything about releasing. And they said, oh, yeah, the software isn't live yet. I said, the software isn't live yet. They said, no, we've been working on it for 2 years. It's really beautiful. It's fantastic. Let me show you. And I declined to have them show me. I just said, wait a minute, you haven't got any actual customers using it. but you've been spending all this time polishing. Turned out there were a couple guys in the back who were running the old system, the one that this was supposed to replace. They were doing all the real work. And that was why everyone was unhappy. That's why I'd been called in to find out, where was there a problem here? The problem was they were working on version 2 and they hadn't released it. And no one had seen it for a couple of years. This did not end well for anyone involved. Nobody on the board, nobody on the development team. This was not a good result. I call this the walled garden. And the kind of analogy to imagine is that you have this beautiful garden, and there's roses, and there are unicorns, and there's beautifully clipped grass, and the hedges have all been clipped, so they're in the shapes of beautiful items and fantastic animals and so on. So it's this fantastic garden that's wonderful to work in, and everybody loves going to work there because it's so wonderful. But there's a nice wall around it. And if you go through the wall, if you go outside into the rest of the world, it's a zombie apocalypse. And what you have is angry customers chasing customer service people, screaming and yelling, trying to eat their brains, saying, this software is horrible, this isn't working for me, this isn't going right. And the problem, this is the pathological version where somebody has eliminated all their tech debt. Boy, that garden is absolutely fantastic. Where I work, it's wonderful. There's no connection to what actual users want, and there's no return on equity. Now, in this case, it was because they hadn't released their software. There are other examples I could cite for you where the software is in the wild. People are actually using it, and they hate it. The developers are busy trimming and cutting and doing beautiful things, and they're doing the right stuff. I don't let people talk about best practices in my presence, but those folks do. They say, oh, man, we have the best practices. We have the best tools, best processes, fantastic engineers. They're really expensive, but they're doing a super job of building the software that nobody wants. And that's the danger. So unreleased software that nobody wants, that is an asset that you're busy paying lots of maintenance on. You're watering the plants, you're maintaining the heating and air conditioning and so on. Nobody's living in the building. And when you have that situation, it's a way to get bankrupt very, very quickly because you've eliminated too much of your debt. You haven't made yourself liquid enough that you can make the changes that you need to. Ryan says, code without debt has a natural tendency to get less general and more specific, despite most people thinking it would be the other way. Less general and more specific. I guess it would be harder to change. Ryan, I have seen it the opposite, where, and this is kind of the walled garden version. Maybe you haven't been in an environment that's quite this pathological. But sometimes folks will create great ivory tower solutions to problems that nobody has. And those tend to be very general. So you can actually get it both ways. But you point out that if you are trying to eliminate all the debt and try to make it as tested as possible and controlled as possible, you constrain your ability to change. And that can make it much more specific because you can work in this industry, but you can't go over to this adjacent industry. There are a lot of folks who are ruining some of their choices about where to build their factories, for example. This is a non-software example, but I think it's a really good one. Suddenly, Mr. Trump comes along and says, you better build your factories in the United States. And they say, I built this one over here in China. What am I going to do? If they don't have liquidity, if they aren't able to invest pretty rapidly in moving to another location, they're going to have trouble. If you've watched the news, you've seen that Apple has actually moved all their importing to the U.S. Into Vietnam and other places where they make iPhones. And China's iPhones are going to come here, where we don't have this tariff war going on. Whatever you think of the tariff war is something you need to deal with. And if you don't have the liquidity to deal with, you get a very specific solution, as Ryan is pointing out, that works in China. And you're really well set up for developing and making things in China. You aren't very ready to switch to someplace else. So Apple, once again, pretty smart company, making sure that it has the liquidity and the optionality to go someplace else. The same thing can happen in your software if you commit too strongly to one environment. And I could tell you lots of stories about that. Ryan, very good point, and I appreciate it. Let me come to a couple other questions. Please put more in the chat. This has been one of the best chats I've had in a live stream for a while. I really appreciate you, the very helpful comments and thoughts. Please add more. I'd love to respond to them. I'd love to debate with somebody who doesn't agree with me. Please disagree. I love that. Let me find where Laura has put our questions from people who couldn't make it. So Barislav asks, how can we incorporate tech debt repayment into product-focused development process? Now, this is one of my favorites. I'm going to be talking about this in a few weeks again when I do the fire your product managers. I don't mean fire the people. I mean fire the role. I'll say more about that then. one thing that can happen is you get product managers who go native. And what they do is they go to people in the business or to customers, and they just churn out a long list of things to stick into the factory. They say, okay, just build me one of these and one of those and a red widget and a blue widget and a purple one. And the engineers just are order takers, and they just write it down and they just build whatever the product manager says. Now, you might think that's very efficient. The problem is that there's no creativity there, and there's no room for paying technical debt. And if you don't make the payments on your technical debt for a long time, the same thing will happen as if you don't do that on your building or on your house or on your car. Eventually, you're going to have a big problem, right? That asset is not going to remain in your possession, or it will not be. It will be an impaired asset. You're going to have a lien against your house or something like that, which is really going to constrain what you can do in your business. Same thing happens in software. So Berislav says, how do I get this in there? Well, the thing you want to do is you want to make sure that whoever's making the product decisions, whether you call them a product manager or something else, that person needs to be making decisions that are for the whole business. It's as if you went to your CFO and you said, I want to hire this person and that person and that person and that person, and here are all the salaries. And you told the CFO, don't look at any of the assets that we have. Don't look at any of the contracts that we have for our office or for cleaning or whatever else it might be. I only want you to look at these employment items. Well, a CFO could do that, but it would be a very irresponsible CFO. And that CFO would not be pointing out, here's an opportunity to increase liquidity. Here's an opportunity to address a source of problems in the business. And your product manager, whoever's making those kinds of decisions, should be empowered to do that. Now, how do you make them empowered? Berislav might say, oh, God, I'm not in charge of them. How do I make sure that happens? Berislav, you could start doing that. That's my point about the product managers. Berislav himself might be a product manager. I don't know that. But wherever you might be in the organization, you can start to make the case for paying down technical debt in business terms. So use these analogies that we've talked about increasing liquidity and making changes faster, improving safety, right? So could we invest in greater safety so we're down less of the time? We have fewer problems that cause our users to be unhappy. How could we, in the building analogy, add more safety rails and safer stairs and so on so people don't get injured? And that makes our asset more valuable. If you can make those kinds of cases, then you have a business case against whatever the salespeople might want or customer service. You should listen to those people too, but also on the weights should be how can I pay down my debt? If you tell your CFO never make any payments to the bank, you're not going to have a CFO for very long, or a business, right? And the same thing should be happening with whoever's making your technical decisions. Berislav, if you're here, feel free to ask more. If you're not, feel free to ask more on the forum. Where we can certainly discuss that further. What else do we have? How can teams reduce the cost of tech debt consistently? That's from Natasha. Natasha, I don't think they should. So the argument I'm making here is that sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes reducing the payments on your debt is not what you want to do. In fact, you might want to have more debt and more payments. You don't want to forget that you have payments, right? That's bad. The bank is not very happy when you don't pay. Your software is not very happy, not easy to change if you never reduce your technical debt, if you never make changes to your software that makes it easier to maintain. But you might want to increase that so you can increase your liquidity. I'm going to take more risk here. I'm going to change more things. I'm going to make things more difficult to work with for a while. And the benefit of doing that's my cost, but you can't only look at the cost side. You have to, just like you can't only look at the payments on your mortgage, you also have to say, and I have this big hunk of cash. Now, where am I going to put that? Am I going to put that into improving the building? Am I going to put that into a new venture? Am I going to train my staff? What do I do with the cash that I get that I've liberated from the asset? That's the thing you want to think about. So, Natasha, I wouldn't do that. Hope that's helpful. What else do we have? Vicky says, this is a great question. Vicky, I love your question. I can't say enough good about it. As developers, why would we want to work for a company who thinks tech debt is good, as opposed to one who keeps their code base clean and modern? Well, Vicky, I refer you to the story from my good friend who had written the e-commerce software by himself. It's nutritious spaghetti. Now, I'm not suggesting that that's necessarily the most fun to work with, right? It's not fantastic to be dealing with debt-ridden company, a company that has lots of debt that's kind of teetering, and it's hard to make the payments, and life is difficult. But sometimes it's better to be in that situation, to be moving into new environments, into new markets, into new opportunities, and the benefit to the business is high. So, Vicky, you can make your life better as a developer by working with legacy code more effectively. And there's a fantastic book called Working with Legacy Code by, I think it's Feathers, if I remember correctly. And that's a great book on how to do that, how you might make that code easier to work with. And improve it as you work. One thing I often tell developers is they should follow the Boy Scout rule. Anybody here who's been a Boy Scout or a Girl Scout, I think they have the same rule. When you go camp in the forest, you should leave the forest cleaner than you found it. If there's a few sweet wrappers and bags of rubbish and so on that previous campers have left, you should go and clean those up as well as whatever you've left in the campsite so that it's cleaner. And if you follow that rule, what you'll find is actually you wind up cleaning up the code and improving the software in exactly the areas where you need to change it. Therefore, you're probably going to come back and camp there again, make the changes again. And when you do that, you're actually improving the software as you go in the most important areas. Someplace not touched very much, you don't camp there often, you don't get a lot of requests to change it, the cost of change isn't that high. Maybe you can let that tech debt ride and leave it there. Now, Vicky, I'm making a case to you about why you might want to do something unpleasant. I get it. It might be nice to be in a walled garden. And if you can find one, and you can find one that has enough cash to keep in business, the unicorns are beautiful. The grass is really nice. People love academia for this because, of course, they don't have to maintain anything. They just build a cool thing, and they release it and put it in a paper, and they get kudos for it, and eventually they get tenure. That's a great way to work. But, we fund universities in a very different way than we fund businesses. We don't ask universities to make a profit. Some do, of course, because they spin things out. But very often in academia, you're not trying to create something that is economically viable. You're trying to create something that advances knowledge. And if you want to do that, please do. I'm in favor of that. And we get a lot of benefits in all of society from that. But if you want to be in a business that's profitable, that is sustainable, that's providing value to people, you're going to have to take some debt. And that means you get good at managing it and you get happy with doing it. Tough message for Vicky. I'd love for Vicky to disagree with me or anybody else. But tech debt is valuable, even though it's painful. And actually, I would even say because it's painful, you have to work extra hard to make the payments. And you get liquidity, you get benefits, you get the opportunity to change your software in a way that you wouldn't otherwise. And that's worth it to the business and worth it to society. Ryan says, we associate technical debt with software engineering. Does technical debt apply to things like change management and training? Fascinating question. So something, Ryan, I've often talked about is product debt. This is where you've chosen to build your product in a way that isn't very scalable, doesn't really work well, isn't quite what customers want, but it gets you a foothold, gets you in the door. Early versions of Facebook didn't have important things. Like there was no feed. There was, I think you could upload one picture and so on. But Zuckerberg was just trying to capture the land. He was trying to get to, he focused on universities at that time. So he was trying to get to the University of Texas and then University of Albuquerque and University of wherever. And as he moved from one to the next, he just wanted a functional piece of software that people could sign up to. And then he could get their friend lists and so on and do all the wonderful and not so wonderful things that Facebook eventually did. Very similar examples over and over again in software where people make product compromises. They borrow against the asset that they have, and it doesn't work very well at the start, but it gives them enough liquidity that they can then rapidly adjust and make the software better. I'll just give you one more example, which is Airbnb, which started, the reason it was called Airbnb is because the two founders would walk around, they'd sneak into apartment buildings that were near conferences, and they would walk around with air mattresses, and they would knock on people's doors and say, would you like someone to stay in your front room? Well, a lot of people slammed the door, and some people weren't home, but a few people said, well, actually, yeah. They said, well, here's an air mattress. Tell me your name. What do you like to do? And, there's South by Southwest happening next week, and there'll be somebody here on your floor. And they go back with an Excel spreadsheet and match people up. No real software that made the thing run, just a simple website where people could register and they did the matching themselves. That's not going to scale, right? That's not how Airbnb runs today. But it was highly, highly liquid. And it meant that they'd made this product compromise that meant that they could then capture the market, get to this, really invent a market and dominate it. So that's another example of non-technical debt. Now you're mentioning change management and training. I wouldn't call that technical debt. I would call that a debt that you can incur. So you might, for example, say, I'm going to hire junior people and I'm not going to train them. And I'm going to send them out in the field. And I'll see whether they can do whatever it is they're supposed to do. Maybe they'll be salespeople or they'll be, customer service or something like that. And I'm going to do minimal training. And the ones that survive, I'm going to have them because then I'll train them. Then I'll invest in them. Now, I'm not sure whether this is a totally moral method because, of course, you're leaving a lot of folks in a painful situation, and they may get fired because they didn't do well and they couldn't figure it out without help, and they might have been more successful otherwise. So I won't say whether this is good or not. It's not quite in my bailiwick, but what I will say is there are folks who do that very successfully, and they could certainly make the same kinds of arguments. Look, I'm using people who are less well trained, but I'm finding out quickly whether they can do the work. And that gives me more liquidity. I can try more folks. I can get them into the field more quickly. I can give them an opportunity. And if they are successful, then I train them more. That's just one example where I can think of this kind of debt analogy being meaningful. I hope that's helpful, Ryan. That's a great topic. I'd love for you to talk more about that. Ask me some more questions about that. That's a really interesting one. Say says, product debt because you built a successful product is a good problem to have. Yes. And as my co-author, Jeffrey Frederick, says, a good problem to have is a good problem for 5 minutes, and then it's just a problem. So say you're exactly right. If you can manage to capture a market, get people really excited, you're using your Excel spreadsheet and your air mattresses and your rucksack, and you're out there doing it, that's great. Then you have a lot of demand. Then you have a real problem. And if you read about the early days of Airbnb and others, they certainly had creative solutions to those problems, but they were real problems and really, really difficult. So I hope that's a helpful idea for you there. As Ryan and Say have both said, you can have debt, you can have the same analogy, not just in the technical field. Okay, so let me close with another story for you. And it's a happy story. It's an example where my customer is really going to clean up. I'm just starting this project, and we're going to intentionally incur lots of tech debt. So what this customer does is they have their own clients. And those clients have lots and lots of information. And my customer figures out what that data means by using humans. So humans go and look at it, and they analyze it, and they bring up spreadsheets, and they pore over it, and they think about it until late in the night, and they write reports that say, here's what your data means. Here's what the answer to your question is about your business and your software and your operation and so on. So they have all this data as input. They have humans who process it, and then they feed it back to the client with insights and ideas. And this works just fine, but they've noticed that there's this thing called AI. And they came to me and they said, Squirrel, we'd like to get an AI in the mix there. We'd like to keep our people, but we want to arm them with tools that will help them do research. And if you watch my 3 laws of AI, you'll know that I'm very keen on AI not writing anything, which they're being very smart not to do, but instead of AI being a super research assistant, getting lots of information, which then humans can write about. So that's how they're doing it. And so I said, great, we can start this next week. You'll start to get answers. And oh my God, we'll start to get answers. I said, yes. And the answers will all be wrong. They said, that doesn't sound very good. Why would we want to build software that would immediately give us wrong answers? I said, because the wrong answers are valuable. What we're going to be doing is incurring tech debt and product debt in this case. We're going to put the data into a very simple schema, into a very simple framework. We're going to organize that data in a way that makes sense to us and is almost certainly wrong. And we're going to then put a chatbot on top of it in a very standard way so that you can talk to it and get answers. The answers will be wrong because we haven't pulled out the right information. We haven't analyzed the table on page 7 and figured out that column 6 is the one that really matters. That's what a human will do. They'll do their best job, but we're going to get that kind of stuff wrong to start with. But then this is going to be tremendously valuable to you because you'll get these wrong answers and you can fix them. Again, this is increasing the liquidity while you are working with the debt. You're taking your asset, which is really in their case, the data flow. They're getting the data from the customers and they're working with it. And we're saying we're going to borrow against that by getting wrong answers. We won't show them to the clients. We'll just keep them internally and say, okay, there's the computer giving the wrong answer again. Oh man. But then we're going to give feedback on that. And the folks who are then maintaining this, we call it the answer machine, maintaining the answer machine will go back and say, we missed a column. Oh, yeah, we didn't pull out this feature. We're missing this piece. We need to get this other data that would match up and enrich this piece of information so we can answer that question. And quite rapidly, we're going to zero in on the target so that we get the right kinds of answers. And that will be tremendously valuable. So this is an example where my client is being very wise, and I'm enjoying helping them. I've encouraged them in this direction, so I'll take the reflected glory for what they're doing. And they are incurring debt intentionally at the outset of a project. They know that they're doing it. They know they're going to need to pay it down and improve this and automate it, get rid of, in the analogy, their air mattresses and their knocking on the doors in their spreadsheet. They're going to automate much more of this. But first, they have to find out, is this valuable? Do people want to pay for it? And can we get good answers? The answer is going to be no. We get wrong answers, and then we improve them. So my question to you is your organization thinking that way? If your organization is not thinking, how can I get more wrong answers and improve them? How can I borrow against the asset that I have here, use the cash to then get a better return and pay it off? You're not thinking, that you're not sweating your assets enough. That's a good CFO type phrase. So please sweat your technology assets. Please sweat your code. Make it do more. Get more from it. That's my message for you today, and I hope that's helpful. I've loved all your questions. This was really enjoyable, as it always is, and love to hear from you more at future events, on the forum, and on my weekly emails. Drop me an email. You know that my phone number is on douglassquirrel.com. I love hearing from all of you, and these kinds of discussions make me excited, and I hope they made you excited as well. Enjoy a lovely sunny day. Take care, everybody.